Welcome to the Latino Business Journey podcast presented by the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Michael Puente. And today we're going to get a little history lesson of how the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce came to be and the development of Latino-owned businesses here in Chicago and Illinois. And our guests here today are Ray Arias. He's one of the early founders back in the day of the forerunner of the IHCC, the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce. And we have Carlos Ponce, one of the early supporters of Latino businesses in both business and government. And Virginia Oviedo, a longtime legendary business owner in Chicago and one of the former owners of several McDonald's restaurants in the area. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Ray, let me start off with you. What do you remember about those early days of forming a chamber?
Yeah, so I do remember back in the 90s what existed prior to the chamber coming in. And there were a number of street chambers. I'll call them street-level chambers because they were named after the 18th Street Chamber of Commerce, the Cermak Road Chamber of Commerce, the Little Village Chamber of Commerce, and they all had their businesses from that community. As some of those businesses started expanding and looking for better opportunities, people got together to discuss the opportunity of creating I'm going to use the word more centralized, more recognized Chamber of Commerce. And those chambers were all pretty much Mexican. So it became the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce, not to exclude other groups, but rather because that was the background. You know, there was the Puerto Rican Chamber and there were other smaller Latino chambers of commerce. But the primary first group of movers and shakers in that space were these Mexican businesses. And some of them were already larger. You know, there was a few construction companies that came together and were doing well, and they were involved in beginning the Mexican-American Chamber. And the other thing that was coincidental, I think, was the fact that we started to have some politicians that were reaching prominent places within city government, if not as elected officials, as appointed officials. Because I remember real clearly that Gary Chico, who later ran for senator, U.S. senator, and several other positions, I think he even ran for mayor, didn't he?
A couple of times, I think.
Yes, he did. So he had political backing, right? So now it made sense. You have the businesses, you have connection with government, you had a lot of Hispanics that were part of corporate America, such as my initial involvement was as a result of being an employee of Ameritech, right? So you had these forces coming together that kind of pointed to, hey, we could do this, we want to do this, and let's get together and figure out how to do it. And that was the beginning.
Why the need, though, for a chamber? What can a chamber do to elevate the voice of the businesses or the areas that they serve?
Well, it's the same battle that's being fought today. You know, we're here. You know, you should recognize us and we contribute to the economy, right? So that was it. And some of the business just wanted to grow. You know, how do I get out of there? How do I get some of the government contracts? How do I get involved with corporate America, you know, with the ComEds of the world, with the Ameritechs of the world, with the gas companies of the world? How do I become part of that? And that was kind of the greater vision, that there had to be a track to that. Following up on what the African-American community did very successfully and very early, right? They learned how to build relationships. They learned how to make connections with the powers that be so that, you know, they'd be prepared to take on greater responsibility, economic opportunities in those spaces.
Yeah, I think that what really happened here, too, is that the chamber became the platform to bring all of this Hispanic leadership together, particularly at the IHCC, and then in concert with other organizations, whether it was HACIA or even community-based organizations like UNO, it brought the leadership together to be able to coalesce behind the idea of what sort of a vision should we have for the Latino community in Chicago. And that led to the ascension, if you will, of a number of politicians who could then give voice to what our community needed to have in terms of representation.
Now, Carlos, that's where you come in because you've been this incredible liaison between government, both at the county level, state level, city level, to help business, primarily Latino businesses. How did your role facilitate Latino-owned businesses rise up?
I think the biggest factor was that we worked together to get the minority business set-asides become real. When I became the head of HACIA and worked also with the IHCC, the 25 and 5 at that time, goals for governmental contracts or even corporate contracts was not real. And we put real teeth behind it because we pushed very hard in making sure that people were held accountable to make sure that minority businesses and women-owned businesses had a fair shot at governmental contracts and corporate contracts.
Go ahead, Virginia.
I was going to say, but that's where I think the chamber kind of like did not focus enough attention on women-owned businesses because the 5% set aside was for women, correct?
Correct.
And that was nothing compared to the amount of growth in especially Latino women in business. I mean, they have been in business as long as I can remember, whether they owned a little grocery store or they made tortillas or even standing out on the street with their little carts selling food. Women have always, I have always been focused on earning their money and being a force. And they were always kind of pushed behind. And I could see in a sense where in the beginning, the chamber, I feel, was really driven by a lot of the men because it had to be driven by them because at that time, no women were really being taken seriously as it started to develop. But one of the things that I think that I wish we would have still continued to focus on more of was the small businesses in the community because there started to be this movement towards government contractors and helping them, grow in that arena, which was really necessary for people to really be able to develop and increase their bottom line. So I understand that. But the bulk of our businesses, I think, are in the community with these smaller businesses. So I'm hoping even now, with our chamber, that they will start to think about how we can coalesce around these small businesses now that are just growing up all over the place.
Virginia, you just has a long career and just this just incredible history in business and making a name for yourself. How, as a female entrepreneur and business owner, how did you help drive the sort of the dialogue to get businesses and chambers to take women-owned businesses seriously?
I think it happened. It really happened, I think, when I became the first woman president of the chamber. And with the support, and I would not have been able to do that, I think, without the support of all the members in our chamber. And I think I was kind of like a light to the other women that they should join our chambers, that they could be part of us, and that there was a way that they could government contracts. And so I think just the visibility of me and the support I think I had of the membership and the board of directors, that I think that we were able together to really move that for women. It just wasn't me, it was all of us. I always think it's always all of us, that make change.
Yeah, and unless I was terribly naive at that time, I don't think there was an animosity or a reason by the membership, a mental model that said, no, we don't want women. I just think, as you mentioned, most of the businesses were run by men. But once women started getting involved, hey, oh, you're there. Oh, you could make a contribution too. I remember one of the early, I'm going to say, forces of energy within the Mexican-American Chamber was Leticia Herrera. I don't know what she's doing now, but had it not been for her organization skills, she did not hold an official leadership position. but she was very much involved in making sure things were done on time, done the right way, had a very nice flair to the events that we had. You know, she was very much essential as part of that. And then, you know, when Virginia was elected, I think that was like the light went on. Hey, we need you guys.
And she
unless I'm wrong.
And she wasn't just the first Hispanic woman to head the chamber. She was the first head of the chamber when it became the IHCC.
IHCC. Actually, you're right. That was where I'm talking about the trajectory changed, because the chamber. There were such wonderful board members. Vince Ronhell. For a while, you know, when everything was changing, Vince was really the force behind keeping his foot to the pedal and keeping us all directed. And he was just a great leader. And unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But during that whole time, we would get together and we would talk about, well, you know, a lot of people were leery about it, to be quite honest, to join the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce because they weren't Mexican. And they didn't want to do that. And so we talked about it. They'd been going on for a while. And we talked about it. And we said, well, you know, because people reached out to us, I'd join you if, and I'd belong if, that we decided that, you know, we could, you know, just more, the stronger we are. So we all decided, and I think, Carlos, you were part of that dialogue too, that we would become the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And from then it just seemed to really grow. And we have the largest, I think, the largest membership in the state of Illinois to this day.
You know, Carlos, talk about just sort of some of those earlier days too, though. You know, creating a chamber, I guess, is sort of a way to create visibility for the community and businesses. How important is that to get that sort of political visibility to move the community forward?
I think it was paramount to have it happen. There were a number of organizations, the IHCC, HACIA, the community-based organization UNO at that time. I think the leadership, it brought all the leadership together, as I mentioned before, to enunciate what role Hispanics, Latinos should play in Chicago, and what should our interest be in the direction of our schools for our children, public safety, all of the issues that are important to the community, including how we fulfill our version of the American dream. And by having these organizations work together, and they did work together, we were able to allow our leadership to be able to have a voice that had to be recognized by the powers that be.
And there were a couple of, the one critical event that comes to mind is we actually had the president of Mexico come up to address one of our gatherings, right? Now, he may have been here for other reasons. I'm not sure what that was all about, but it was at one of the major downtown hotel ballrooms where he came in with his, you know, group of professionals and people, and the mayor of Chicago had to be there, right? Because you got this visiting dignitary, and it was a very fancy event. The mayor came, he got to see this assembly of Hispanic business leader, and I think the political lights went on and said, hey, we got something here, you know? There's people, there are businesses, there's money, and that always attracts politicians for some reason, right? There's votes and there's money. And I think that event, it was still the Mexican American Chamber at that time, was one of the stepping stone events to greater awareness and greater recognition. So
You know, Ray, getting so many people in a room to agree to something and those earlier days of bringing businesses together must have been difficult just to what is going to be our focus, what is going to drive us. Can you talk a little bit about those challenging days?
Let me just be clearly. The early days, there was a small group of us that met at Nueva Leon on 18th Street, and I can see them just as clearly as yesterday, that came together to start talking about this kind of thing. There were a couple of people from the Pilsen Chamber, a couple of people from the Cermak Road Chamber, starting to talk about that. And then, just as human nature, not in necessarily a bad way, but, there was some contention on who should be involved, what type of leaders should we go after, what should our focus be. But the most important thing, there was agreement that we needed to come together and that we would work through those issues. And then even as we got into year 2 and 3, there were some personalities that were stronger than others. I can recall some very distinct folks who did not really, and these were individuals, it wasn't the whole chamber, that did not want to include non-Mexicans, and it's like, really?
But in
We
the
won't
end,
mention names.
but in the end, it became a strength of Chicago Latinos because it became an instinct that if you did anything, you had to include Mexicans, you had to include Puerto Ricans, you had to include Cubans, Central and South Americans, because in the rest of the country, they didn't have this level of representation in their communities. So it turned out to be a strength for our business community.
Yeah, it was a strength. And I think you also have to recognize the migration of Hispanic groups to Chicago. So Pilsen was Mexican since the 30s, from what I understand, right? The same with Little Village and some of these areas. So these were not recent arrivals. I myself am third generation. Right. And there were others that were third generation, fourth generation as well in Chicago.
Because you talked a little bit too about the transition between when the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce to changing the name, the Illinois Hispanic. How do you bring those very strong opinions and factions together under one umbrella? And people still, at that time, were still getting used to the term Hispanic, and people they don't want to bring anybody into their house. You're a business owner. You're able to sort of tear down some of those walls, so to speak. What do you remember about those earlier struggles?
I think it was because there had been such a solid foundation created from the beginning that I think that even though it had been the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce, there had always been interaction with the other chambers or within the different communities. So there was always a relationship. So I think when the IHCC began with its new name, it was an easy transition for people, and because they'd already had the contacts with the corporations and the city officials, these people just migrated. And actually, companies felt more comfortable participating with the IHCC because then they were hitting all the Latinos, or so they thought. So it was really an easy migration. And then there became a time where the chamber really had to take an aggressive move against the state and the city, because the Latino businesses especially, many of them were just like subcontractors. So they would work for somebody and they wouldn't be getting their money in a timely manner. So many of them were walking the line already because they were small businesses. So then the chamber was able to go out and negotiate. Actually, I say it's negotiating, but they really challenged government to be more effective.
In getting contracts, you immediately would say, talk to Carlos. Carlos, what in those earlier days, what advice did you give to businesses when they were setting up this chamber, and how both, depending on your position at the time, either with the county or the city, how the city can play a role in development and supporting this emerging new market?
Through the set-aside programs. It started out at 25 and 5, later it went 25 and 10, I think. It gave a real boost, a real chance to participate in multi-million-dollar programs for Hispanic businesses. I think one of the first major endeavors that happened was when they did the rebuilding of McCormick Place. They actually had minorities, African-American, Hispanic, prime contractors on that project. And later on, it showed the trend of where you could bring in minorities and they could do the job. Also, encouraging our businesses that they had to develop a real infrastructure to be able to turn in the paperwork on time and understand how the system worked. So it wasn't just a case, hey, I'm Hispanic, I'm going to get a contract. It was, you have to understand and develop your business so that you can compete, because eventually the hope was that you were going to grow your business big enough that you would grow out of the program.
No, this is for anybody really, but where do you see that where chambers, whether the Hispanic chamber, can aid businesses now? I mean, Latino businesses are just grown by the just incredible expansion. Where does today's chamber fit in all that in assisting these emerging businesses still?
So that's a very, very good and tough question to answer, because people are beginning to recognize that technology is changing the dynamics of business, right? So no longer is an accountant just an accountant. You better have an AI background as well, because we don't need those traditional manual type trades skill sets, because accounting is, and I'm using that as an example, is not a trade, it's a skill set. But guess what? It's being changed by the fact that we have now artificial intelligence that's going to take away a lot of those manual tasks. So what has to happen is that people have to recognize that the new frontier is software and AI. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to replace everything, but it'll probably replace 20, 30, 40% of the way we do business today. And the chambers, because they have interested audiences, need to start talking about that. And here's how we can help you identify what's coming in your field, right? Here's how we can help you market better, because Amazon wiped out everybody, right? Right. So chambers, I think, have the opportunity to educate businesses on here's the next trends, people, companies, and if they take advantage of it, that's up to them. But the fact is that most people don't have the energy or the time to start learning about those things on their own.
But what's really interesting in that article that I quoted to you is that the majority of new businesses are really being developed now by these younger persons. These younger people now are out there and developing these techie companies and all these different kinds of projects. So I think a chamber has to really, and I don't know if that generation now is going to be all that committed to joining a chamber, because they don't even want to go to church, So how do you make a chamber worthwhile to the younger generation to feel the need to have that? Good question. I would have to think about that one, because I think we'd need a group of people, a group of young people to tell us what they need.
I'm going to jump into that. I think you go back to basics. I think that the chamber is a forum to bring in people, and they have to do a lot of outreach. And I think the IHCC does a great job. It's got a variety of different programs of how to deal with going after government contracts or developing business models, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, the Hispanic business presence, both businesses and corporate employees, has just grown. And the question becomes then is, when you get the people together, what do you say to them? What sort of avenues do you give them to develop leadership and avenues of potential action that they can take? And that's the real question is, how do we develop our leaders to speak and lead?
And how do we appeal to these young people to want to come to those chambers meetings? That's going to be the number one thing, is that we're going to have something that's going to want them to come, and not do it on, in a network or on your phone or on your iPad, But
we do know younger people love their phones, and they can be right across from you, and we all have kids or grandkids just wanting to text you instead of actually talking to you.
And they're so smart. I mean, this next generation, well, I'm old already, but, these younger generations, they're very smart, and they really know what they want. And I think they're creative. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there.
But Ray, when you look about the early days and the transition into now, and part of it is, part of that is your legacy. Everybody who's sitting here is that's part of your legacy of how everything has grown. What do you think about when you see that, how they're still around, they're still serving businesses, they're still trying to learn how to deal with business in the future and how to grow. But part of that is all of you collectively, your legacy. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's very gratifying. But even saying that, I had no idea. None of us had any idea what the future would be, so how it would be as successful as it is. Even with the ups and downs of personalities and economies and all those things, the core belief is that, as a group of people, we can accomplish individual businesses, collaborative relationships with government and corporates, right? And even with ourselves, because a lot of us have evolved because we've been able to form partnerships, right? So it's really, really good to see that. And the thing that I look back on is that there was this idea. I was on the technology side, and I'm using this as an example of what we call co-opetition, right? So I'm sitting next to another technology company, 3 technology companies, and somebody comes in and starts talking about a contract with the state of Illinois. And we all think we have to compete against each other. That's the wrong attitude, man. If anybody thinks that, you ain't going to be in business very long. So we created the co-opetition, and I think as a legacy, that is a valuable characteristic, that people could cooperate and build something together and still move ahead.
What do you think about that, Carlos? You helped build what you're seeing out today.
I think one of our biggest challenges is how do we work. This may be a little controversial. How do we work with the African American community in terms of, I'm looking at Chicago, I'm looking at Illinois, because they are in power positions. And how do our respective communities reach an understanding of how do we better serve our people? And it's challenging. Because on one hand, you've seen the African American community ascend in so many different ways, but at the same time, Hispanics have grown in terms of population, business development, and we can and should have a greater voice in the direction that we're taking. So I think that's going to be kind of an interesting one in terms of what happens in the future.
Well, let me ask you this. You say it's an interesting one, but is it one that's needed, given that you have 2 large populations, both with, obviously decades of lived experience? Those communities actually have to come together, correct? I mean, is it vital that they come together?
It's very vital. It's essential, I think. It doesn't always happen for a variety of different reasons, history being a big part of it. But again, we're seeing a Hispanic community that is reaching its potential in terms of population growth, in terms of business development. Hispanic children make up most of the population of the Chicago school system. What's happening to our graduates and things of that sort, and we naturally want to have a voice in directing what happens to them.
As we're wrapping up here, is there any other last story do you like to tell about the development of Latino businesses in Chicago here in the future? Something that hasn't been said.
I think that there's tremendous opportunities yet to be in fields. When we think about the Hispanic Chamber, Illinois Hispanic, most of us think about small businesses. But there are major industries, I think, that need to be taken on, such as the insurance industry, such as the healthcare industry, where entrepreneurs are making millions of dollars, billions of dollars with new technologies. And some of them were just startups yesterday. So I think that the focus, as we talked about, has to change, that there are industries that need to be strategized on. How do we get into the insurance business, right? How do we become payers? How do we become providers? Those are the next frontiers, I think, for many businesses.
like to add to that, Virginia?
I would say for me, the future is all about our young people. It's what I said, that they're just so knowledgeable and they're just so aware of things that I feel that our future is going to be with our youth. And I think that they're well prepared to do it. So I think that our chamber, if we could find a way to really support them in their efforts, I think that they're going to be all these big CEO owners, these big company owners.
Well, Carlos, even though I'm a White Sox fan, you got your Cubs pin there. I'll give you the last word here.
I'm going to say that I think it would behoove the IHCC and the other Hispanic businesses to really do a very strong outreach, because as large as our memberships are right now, there are many, many Hispanic businesses that aren't really part of the network, if you will. Look at all the landscaping businesses that are out there, the small grocery owners. I mean, there are so many, and if we were able to attract and bring these people in to the process, even on a marginal basis, could you imagine the voice that we could then
Yeah, that's
have?
what I said. We have this whole pocket we've not dealt with.
Well, I want to thank everybody here for joining us here today. It was certainly an educational experience, so thank you. And I want to, again, thank our guests, Virginia Oviedo and Carlos Ponce and Ray Arias. Thank you so much.